or not. Brilliant. Trevor, if you can man the chat, please. I'll make you co-host. Because I think I see people in the waiting room. Just okay. Make co-host. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Okay, so we are a few minutes behind, but hey, we'll try to catch up. So welcome again, and this is the free taster session on becoming a privacy analyst. And sometimes you might hear that title being referred to as a data protection and privacy officer. They mean the same thing, and I will go into a bit more detail. So welcome to this free taster. Like I said, any questions pop in the chat. So today, quickly, we will talk a little bit very briefly about Sterling Careers, because this free taster has been put together by Sterling Careers, and I'm the director and CEO of Sterling Careers Limited. We are registered in the UK, but we have a global reach because we are fully remote. And so we have people joining from all around the world, from Canada, the US, Africa, Nigeria, and the UK. And I'll also talk to you about my journey into the privacy space. So I've not always been in this space. I think I did a pivot about 6 years ago. I've been in the IT business analysis space for about a decade. And I'll talk to you about that. And then we'll go into steps that you need to take if you're looking to become a privacy analyst. Then we'll look at behind the scenes, a sample GDPR compliance project. Now, you will find out that GDPR, whenever you hear that word privacy or privacy, it is obviously linked to the GDPR, which I will talk about. GDPR just means the General Data Protection Regulation, which obviously focuses on managing personal information, looking at privacy considerations that need to be made about consumers, i.e. your customers or even your employees' personal information, which we'll talk about in a lot of detail. And then we'll also have a amazing lady who I've known for some time now. She'll share her story of how she came onto our program, worked on one of our GDPR compliance projects, and she was able to secure a role, and now is on her second contract. She'll share a little bit about that as well, and she will talk about that particular project that she worked on, and we will look at a few samples for you to look at what does it mean to become a privacy analyst. What will a privacy analyst be doing? What's your day-to-day? And I'll talk to you also about the day in the life of a privacy analyst, and then we'll also go into our value proposition. What is it? How can we help you to become a privacy analyst? What does that entail? What do we offer? And that's pretty much what today we'll be covering. Trevor, can you please let people in? I can see people waiting. Okay, who are we? Sterling Careers. So we are a training organization, like I said. We also do a bit of career coaching as well. And we are fully remote, focusing mainly on project management, business analysis. We do some soft skills development, which will be coming back again in 2023. And of course, your data protection and privacy, which is what we are going to be focusing on today. And we are made up of IT and business domain experts over about 20 years, a combination of experience, cutting across financial services, higher education, travel, automotive, pharmaceuticals, amongst others. And that is, and this team is made up of, our mentors, our trainers, and some consultants that work with us. And of course, our model really is very, very hands-on. So we're not so much about, the theoretical part, which of course is important. And so we will give you those fundamentals, but we focus mainly on how you can develop relevant skills, because we have seen that gives you more leverage. It gives you an edge when you are able to demonstrate that, yes, you can do the job. And that's kind of what we really focus on. So our model is such that you get the initial theoretical background, and then you work as an intern, let's put it that way, of course, unpaid, working on our real live projects. So our projects are not fictitious, they're not made up, they are real projects that we use within the business. Okay, sorry, let me just admit. Trevor, I'm not sure why you're not able to admit them. And basically we our engagements, our sessions are always, of course, like I said, virtual. We're fully remote. And we always say to you, don't quit your job until you have made that successful transition. Hence, why our sessions are usually in the evenings. So you can do your 9 to 5 and then come on, for the training program or working on projects. And we have some occasional ad hoc sessions on Saturdays as well. So a bit about me. I am the director and CEO of Sterling Careers Limited. My name is Modupe Veronica Yusuf, originally proud Nigerian who came into the UK going on to 19 years now to do a master's in strategic human resource management with the University of South Wales, then Glamorgan. And I've been in the IT space over 10 years now, and I've worked across different sectors and domains. I've worked with the automotive industry, higher education, digital transformation, travel, and retail. And I recently, well, not too recent now, nearly 6 years, I pivoted into the data privacy space, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. Having, been a business analyst for a long time, I was looking for a specialist area that, I enjoy and, that had longevity, and I just fell in love with privacy, and I started working towards that. It didn't take me too long. I was able to pivot into that space. And fortunately, I became a consultant for a travel organization, and somehow I just grew with that organization for about 5 years as their in-house consultant, and I became the privacy manager or lead of the privacy department, and I've been doing that. I'm also recently an independent privacy consultant. And my journey really started from, the struggling, coming into the UK from Nigeria with a master's in human resource management, looking to, of course, use that certificate or that degree to break into corporate UK, but it was very, very, very challenging for me at the time. But to cut a long story short, I soon learned how, that you can actually pick up relevant skills and you can take advantage of your transferable skills that you've had before to get into the tech space. And that's kind of how I was able to get into the tech space, even though I didn't have a technical background. And I've been helping people through my program, which I'll tell you a lot about in a minute. And so my area of expertise, of course, is IT business analysis and data privacy. And I think I mentioned my career change journey. I won't go into too much detail because we've got quite a bit to cover. So we're talking about how you can become a privacy analyst. And let me just quickly tell you why, in case you're wondering, why does she think she deserves to talk about this? I'll tell you why. So like I said, had been in business analysis for a long time, and I wanted something a bit more specialist. And I sort of I heard about GDPR. I heard about the fact that it was in high demand around that from 2016 up until 2018. So May 25th, 2018 was when the GDPR came into fusion, and it was more a case of organizations, businesses operating or doing business within the EU, of course, being mandated by the GDPR to become GDPR compliant, and hence there was the need for privacy specialists to help organizations, to attain that compliance. Sorry, I'm having to admit people, and I'm not sure why Trevor is not able to do that. Sorry for that. Yeah, and so I think let me tell you how my journey started. So I heard about this and I was interested, and then I started doing some digging. I started doing some research. So a lot of you who are, of course, are looking to make a career change. You want to get into tech, you want to get into a different space. And you're just wondering, where do I start from? So normally I will say, do your research. Don't go head first. Don't jump into it because somebody said it's lucrative or it is this or is that. Do your own research so that you are getting in from a place of knowledge and understanding of what it entails. And so I started doing research. I started talking to people. I knew 1 or 2 people who had become GDPR consultants, and I started talking to them. And then I went for a crash course over the weekend weekend on how, I think with IT governance, that's what they're called. So Google them, search and have a look at them, do your research. I'll be dropping a lot of, links and stuff for you to do some research so you understand what this entails. And so I spent 4 months after I'd done that, a crash program over a weekend. I joined a program like the one I run now. I think I spent 4 months working on a mini project, a GDPR compliance project, and then I started getting out there. So I took advantage of my business analysis skill set, because that's also very important, that you are able to leverage what you have already. And so I was able to sort of position myself, and hey, I started applying for jobs. I think my very first interview was the one I got. And I'll talk maybe, if there's time, I'll talk a little bit about that. So anyway, that's how I started becoming, I got into business analysis, data privacy as a consultant for a global organization. They are in 60 countries, yes, 8 regions. And I did a presentation, and before I got home that day, I was offered the job as their privacy consultant. And I helped this organization to carry out what you call their data discovery. I'll go deep dive into GDPR. I'll tell you about the core principles, because as a privacy analyst, you need to understand those principles of the GDPR, because that is where it sort of stems from. And I'll talk about that. So I did a presentation on how, I would be, as a consultant, help them to drive this data discovery, which was what they wanted to actually start with. And I'll tell you, over 5 years now, I'm still with that organization. So I was as a consultant on a day rate, and then I was offered to lead their compliance program. And that's something that I've been doing. Now, this program sort of cuts across 30 plus brands within travel and retail. And so I've been leading that department for the organization. And so I've got a wealth of experience, not only in GDPR, but what you call CCPA. So that's the California Consumer Privacy Act. That's another, this is more UK focused, while the GDPR, of course, is EU focused. And so when you know how to support an organization to become GDPR compliant, you will get the core elements, because most of all these other legislations that have come up have stemmed from GDPR. So a lot of them are piggybacking on GDPR. So if you know the fundamentals as a privacy analyst of what GDPR entails, how you can help an organization to become GDPR compliant, all the others will be easier for you to pick up. And so over time, I've picked up, skills in these other areas, because this organization that I've been working with, like I said, we're across 60 countries, 8 regions with different regulations, as it were. And my approach, which I will talk about, is the IBM approach. I will talk about that framework in a minute, and it's really a risk-based approach. I'll tell you more about that. And essentially what on my day-to-day is really looking at data protection policies and procedures within your organization, because of course, privacy is really, GDPR talks about personal data of living individuals, not dead people, living people. So your data, my data, data that belongs to employees, data that belongs to customers, data within your ecosystem, GDPR says that you need to be more mindful of how that data is processed, ensuring that you have the right safeguards in place to guard against any potential risk. And essentially, in a nutshell, that is what a privacy analyst will do. So you will be looking at that organization, looking at the way they process personal information, looking at what you call their processing activities, whether it's their marketing activities, whether it is even employee HR related, and all the day-to-day operations that they get involved with, if of course it has to do with personal data processing. So what I do is I lead the team. I've got people who work with me, and we are looking at our policies. We are looking at training for our employees. We're looking at how we can improve, the way that we handle data, ensuring that our information assets, our databases that store this information are secure, and things like that. And essentially, that's what I do. And of course, I carry out risk assessments, and I provide recommendation to the business to say, right, okay, this is how we need to make sure that we are putting these things in place, when we are running projects, where we've got a software house, we are, different softwares that we're rolling this software out, and we're looking at ensuring that we have a privacy by design framework in place. I'll talk about that in a minute, and a lot of other things. So my day-to-day is really looking at policies, supporting the business. We might have issues, and it'll come to my team to say, okay, well, maybe there was a data breach incident, or the list goes on, or maybe somebody like yourself may have reached out to the organization asking for access to your data, and a lot of all these things I will cover in a minute. So there's a lot that goes on in the life of a privacy analyst. There's no days is the same, to be quite honest. It is quite interesting, also challenging as well. It involves a lot of people management as well. You're engaging with the business, you're engaging with technical teams, and all of that. So you've got to be somebody who has excellent communication skills, who likes or who enjoys, engaging with people. You're not a shy person, because you will have to engage with the business and the technical team. So I drove the data discovery process for over 30 brands, and this lasted for about six months, when I first started as a contractor. And at the end of the day, we had what we call a record of processing activities across all the brands. Okay, let me tell you why privacy professionals or privacy professionals are in high demand. Now, a lot of us can relate, of course, with the pandemic. It was global, wasn't it? So we know for a fact that there was a shift, in the way that businesses were sort of operating, because everybody was now online. Thanks to COVID, everything was remote, and most organizations have remained either fully remote or even a hybrid. And so it means a lot of things are done online. And of course, what that means is there will be a lot of information flying around the place, information that also includes personal information or personal data of consumers. And so it made it very, very, very important, or actually it just increased that focus on organizations and just ensuring that you are thinking about the privacy of the consumers whose data that you hold or you process, or even your employee data. So a lot of people were working from home, and so it was just important that the right safeguards were in place, to process, to what you call it, to manage day-to-day operations, as it were, because information was just here and there or flying around. And so everybody was online. And that, of course, increased that focus on ensuring, thinking about privacy, thinking about data protection, as it were. And so what did that mean? What does that mean? It just meant that most people, most organizations, most businesses needed privacy professionals who knew about, or who are aware, who are knowledgeable and experienced on, okay, how do we ensure that we've got the right data protection measures, as it were, in place? How can we improve our operations? How can we improve the way that we process the personal data of our staff or even consumers alike? And of course, this regulatory environment sort of changed a lot. Now you can see on the board there, it says that, I picked this up from the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. Now, just polling 194 countries, about 66% of them had a legislation in place. Now, some of them had, where this legislation were in draft mode, but of course, with everybody going online, with our consumers being more aware of their rights as data subjects. So now me, and everyone else knows that you've got a right, and you can say to an organization, do you have consent to use my data? The way that you're processing my data, have I said it's okay for you? Back in the days, you'll find that, you get emails, unsolicited emails, or even phone calls and all the like. Let's focus on emails now. You get those emails and you ask yourself, how did these people get my information? How have they sent me this email? And all of those things. And that was because organizations were just, scraping and getting people's information and storing them in their databases and just using them as they deem fit without checking, whether privacy considerations have been made, without also checking that they have consent to use this data. But of course, with GDPR coming into place, all of that changed the trajectory of how data was being processed. And so now this was cause why data privacy professionals were in high demand, because businesses were like, okay, where do we start? Now, when I joined the organization that I joined, now they had started their privacy program 6 months before I joined, but it seemed as though nothing had been done, because at that time, a lot of people didn't know where to start. They knew that there was this new regulation. Everyone was talking about GDPR. Everyone was talking about 25th of May, as though the sky was going to fall. But a lot of people didn't really know how to go about it, where to start from with regards to becoming compliant with this new regulation. And so those of us who sort of got in early, we were of course in high demand. And now I must tell you that it hasn't changed. It's even, I'll tell you a bit more now, that organizations that came late to the party before are now beginning to see that it is important that they have those they are GDPR compliant, because apart from the fact that if you are caught not being compliant, there are huge fines. And so you can't just, leave things to chance and all of that. So it just meant that there was a demand for privacy professionals. Now, somebody asked me if privacy is in tech. I think that's how you put it. I would say yes and no. Now, let me use my example, my experience as an example. When I got into the space, the privacy space, I was sitting within the tech arm of this organization. And so you might find a lot of information out there where there is that argument. They say, should your privacy team be sitting within tech, within the tech department, or should it be within the business, as it were, at the strategic level? There's all those things you will find out there. So at the beginning, it was more a case of, we're not even sure how to drive this thing. And so you found that, or way back then anyway, things are changing slightly. So what happened was that a lot of tech teams or departments were the ones now driving the privacy program or the compliance program, because you're talking about data, you're talking about information. Yes, it is personal data, but this data is not in transit all the time. This data resides in information assets. It resides in systems or being processed via systems. And so your tech team, comes in there, because they're the ones that say, oh, right, we need to ensure that we have the right security measures in place and all of that. So we found that data privacy, or the privacy compliance program, or GDPR compliance program, was now driven by tech teams. Okay, now this screen that you're looking at, I hope you can still see my screen, by the way, now says that there are quite a few tech jobs that involve data privacy. Now, you hear that common phrase, people say, what do you call it? Data is the new oil. So data is so important. But of course, in this case, we're talking about personal data. So please always know that when you hear GDPR, when you hear data privacy, we're talking about personal data. So of course you have corporate data, you have data for different things, but we're talking about personal data, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So if you are looking at your cybersecurity or information security engineering, or engineer, or cybersecurity analyst, or infosec analyst, these days you're finding out, and I can tell you from experience, that there are overlaps. Okay, I'll go into a bit more detail. There are overlaps with your privacy analyst and your infosec or your cybersecurity analyst. Because yes, even though cybersecurity sort of looks at the systems, okay, and just making sure that yes, you've got the right security measures in place, but then these systems are not just there. Some of these systems will contain information and personal information. Okay, so there is that data protection element there. So you find overlaps. So before now, you find cybersecurity teams sort of doing their own thing in a silo, and then you have your data privacy team doing their own thing. But now there is that push for synergy, because these two teams need to talk to one another. for you to operationalize your whole data protection policy and even your cybersecurity requirements, as it were. So I will tell you now, as we go along, that there is that demand. There is that, a lot of organizations are saying that, hey, cybersecurity analysts, you need to know about data protection. You need to know about data privacy. You need to put data privacy in the middle of your those security elements that you're talking about, and all of those things. I'll talk about that. So there's that element there that is important. Even your software developer, your software engineer. So nowadays, we're talking about what you call your data protection impact assessment. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but you find that as software developers are, building whatever softwares they are developing or engineering, there is also, these softwares may, of course, be used to process personal information. And so one of the requirements of the GDPR is that you put technical measures in place. Okay, so you can't just say, oh, I'm going to develop this software. Now, if this software is going to be processing personal data, what have you put in place to ensure that when data is transiting via this software or this application, you've got the right safeguards in place? When data is at rest, and all of those things. So there are overlaps here and there. Even as your business analyst, now you're seeing job titles. I think the person who's going to share, I think her first contract was GDPR business analyst. In fact, I was referred to as a GDPR business analyst when I first started, before I became a privacy manager. And so there are overlaps here and there, and it's just because data cuts across the board, okay? And even personal data, even more so. So this just gives you, I saw this and I thought, oh, let me pick this up and put it out there. Okay, so it just means that most tech jobs are involving data privacy. So there is that hunger, there is that need for you to know about data privacy, to know about data protection, to be knowledgeable about it, because then you will be, you'll take a holistic approach in your role. Now, I want to ask a question. Is there anyone here who's in tech, and you're joining here, you've joined this program today, sorry, you've joined this taste session because you're looking to pivot into the privacy space? Can you put yes in the chat board and tell me, in the chat, sorry, and tell me what your role is currently? What are you doing at the moment? If you are in tech, if you're not in tech, that's fine. But if you are in the tech space, but you're looking to pivot into the privacy space, let me know. Okay, I'm just going to check. Business analyst, brilliant. Okay. Okay, brilliant. Anyone else? So are you looking to pivot into privacy space? So you put a yes. So I'm assuming that's a yes. Anyone else? Anyone else? Okay, who's in tech and is looking, is private? Okay. Okay. Okay, brilliant. Just one. That's fine. That's fine. Yeah, okay. I just wanted to get a sense of, who we have on here today. So let's quickly go straight into skills that you require. Now, I want to talk about just soft skills. Okay. Yeah, soft skills, because I like to say that you start with your soft skills, because most times your soft skills are skills you already have, and you don't want to focus too much on what you don't have. So my approach is always start with what you have first, and then you can look at maybe other hard skills or technical skills that you need to layer on. So as a privacy analyst, I think I did mention already that you will need to have excellent communication skills, whether writing or even verbal. Also, you need to be organized. You're also a problem solver, because at the end of the day, what does a privacy analyst do? Is just really supporting a business or an organization, in ensuring that they are compliant in line with the General Data Protection Regulation. So you're helping them to problem solve, really, because you're looking at, how they're doing, how they're processing data or personal data at the moment, how their systems systems are being used, what data protection considerations have been made, and all of these things. And then even when I am problem solving every day on the job, because we might have maybe some employee who's leaving and they say, okay, can I have all the data that is held on file about me? Or maybe a disgruntled employee who wants to know the information held about them. And according to GDPR, we've got that we are obliged, we must give them, we must oblige them, we must, fulfill that request. And so there is, or it might be somebody who, I have a case of somebody who had taken her laptop home, and she also had a flash drive that had records of customers. Okay, and that flash drive was meant to be in the office and locked away, but somehow, because this staff needed to work, took this flash drive, and unfortunately it got lost, I think in a taxi or something, and that was reported to my team, and this was about a week after. And of course, according to GDPR, within 72 days of knowing about a data breach incident, after carrying out assessment, you should report that, things like that. So we got to know about it, and we had to get things going to say, okay, do we have to do risk assessment and a lot of things that I won't go into all that detail, but you're constantly solving problem with regards to how, data privacy, or somebody might say, you don't have a cookie banner on your website. And I do not like that, because people are more aware now of what the GDPR requirements are. And that, of course, is sent to us, and data breach incidents every now and then. So there is never a dull moment. We are solving problems all the time. So if you're looking to get into this space, are you somebody that enjoys problem solving, that is not overwhelmed when it's just dropped on your table and you've got to sort it out? So that is very important as well. Analytical skills, very important as well, because you will be assessing, you're doing a lot of risk assessment, because this whole thing is about risk to your data subjects, whether your consumers or customers or your employees, how you're handling their data. If anything was to happen, if there was a hack, if there was, a data breach, to any of the systems that you hold, what would you do? Do you have the processes and procedures in place, to risk assess and to mitigate any risks that have been identified and things like that? So as a privacy analyst, you've got to be analytical. You are somebody that isn't afraid to research. So we are looking at every time, okay, what is out there, to ensure that we are supporting that business. So research, and you're able to do your presentation. You present the findings of your research. So that is a skill. If that's something that you do already, that's something that you're happy doing, that is, you can take that again. And of course, prioritizing your deadlines, because it can be very time consuming, it can be busy, okay? So, but you've got to know how to prioritize. You've got to be organized. Good communication skills, I already mentioned that, because you're talking across the business, across technical teams, and that is something that you must have. Okay, ability to work well in a team and as an individual as well. So if you can relate to some of the skills, you're well on your way. Okay, let's deep dive now. What does it mean to become a data privacy analyst? Now, I have just put these three sections or areas to cover. Now, this by no means is exhaustive, but these are the core areas that you want to start thinking about. You would have heard me mention GDPR. It is the General Data Protection Regulation. Type in the chat, have you heard that before? Are you familiar? Just say yes or no. Have you heard about GDPR? Were you around maybe a few years ago when everybody was sending out emails to everybody and your cat and the dog, asking you to give your consent for your data to be processed? Did any of you get those emails? Type in the chat for me, please. Let me know, are you aware of the GDPR? Brilliant, thank you, keep it coming. So GDPR is your General Data Protection Regulation. Brilliant, thank you for that. Those of you who are engaging, keep coming. So the core principles, as a data privacy analyst, you've got to know about the General Data Protection regulation. You've got to have an understanding of the core principles. Now, there are 99 articles, but I must say that you don't need to memorize these articles. But the core areas are very important. And I'll talk to you a lot about the ICO is the Information Commissioner's Office. This is the supervisory arm within the UK pre-Brexit, and they came out with, a guide, way to sort of start working towards GDPR compliance for those that didn't know how to, and that was something that was adopted by a lot of organizations. Now, you've got to know about GDPR, you've got to understand the principles, and I will talk to you in a minute. So the first thing, after understanding those GDPR principles, where you start as a privacy analyst is to carry out what you call your data mapping. And essentially what that means is you want to help an organization to tease out their data flow, whether it's inbound or outbound. Data that's flowing across your ecosystem, data that's flowing into that organization, or data that they are sending out, that they are sharing with third parties, or they are processing for whatever reason. Using my organization as an example, so we have a travel business and we also have a hotel chain, and that means we are processing data that belongs to you who wants to go on a trip, or any of our trips, or you want to stay in any of our hotels. So we've got thousands and millions of consumer data within our system. And before GDPR, this data was just there and nobody really mattered, nobody cared so much. But GDPR now mandated on organizations or data controllers. Data controllers are people, of course, who have control of the data. They determine how that data is processed, as it were. Okay, so we now needed to say how we need to identify this data that we hold, how it's flowing, where it's flowing, all our systems that process personal data, what we call our information assets. And so a privacy analyst is the person that will come into that organization. A lot of times you could use a manual approach. That was what I used when I started. Then there weren't so many OneTrust and softwares, data mapping softwares that you could use to make life easier. I had to start with Excel. I put a questionnaire together. I had to sit with a lot of these teams to ask questions, and it took months. But thankfully, now that, this whole privacy environment has evolved, a lot of software houses have now, developed or built, made life easier. And so you have different data mapping softwares that you can use, to tease out the data that flows across your organization. So as a privacy analyst, you would be expected to help that organization to carry out that data mapping exercise. You come up with a data mapping strategy. Now, when I went for the interview, they asked me, how would you help us to carry out this data discovery? And I put together a presentation and I showed them my strategy on how I will sit down and with all the various teams, and I will sit with HR, I will sit with marketing, I will sit with, the various functions to say, let us see, all the processing activities that have personal data flowing, and what do you use the data for, which systems hold this data, how long does this, and all of these things. So it is quite an intensive and extensive piece of work. So a data privacy analyst will help an organization to carry out data mapping. Okay, then you come up and say, right, okay, now you've done, and it is a requirement according to Article 30 of the GDPR that all data controllers and processors should have what you call a record of processing activities according to Article 30. Now, it wasn't because somebody would come to your door and say, show me, but we had to get it done in case, there's an incident. They will ask you, okay, have you carried out this data mapping exercise? And if you have, where is your record of processing activities? Because you need to know how this data is being processed, how the data is flying from point A to point B, and you have the right safeguards in place when data is in transit and when data is at rest. So all of those things are required of a data privacy analyst. Then you also look at consent. Now, I talked about that earlier. Back in the days, it was, you could just use people's information as you please and nobody cared. But now you've got to ask, you've got to get consent. So when you go onto a lot of websites, you will see that maybe like a banner, it pops up, or it might just be a little disclaimer there to say, are you happy for us to process your data? There might be a tick box there. It'll ask you to give consent and all of these things. Or maybe you are placing an order and you are, of course, they are captured anywhere, any touch point where data is being captured. The GDPR actually mandates us to have that there, where we are being upfront and transparent. And we are saying that the information that you've provided will be used only for that which you are expecting it to be used for and nothing else. Whereas back in the days, you'll find organizations will collect your data for one thing and they use it for another. But of course, all of that changed with the GDPR. And so consent was very important. It was one of the lawful bases that GDPR expects you to take into consideration. Okay, so and essentially what you are also doing is, we talked about your data subject rights. So you as an individual, you have a right to speak to me today, tomorrow, that, okay, I signed up for this call. You asked for my email, you asked for whatever information, and you can say, you know what, this information that you hold about me, I want to know. And you can actually say, can you delete my information after this taster session? And I cannot say no. We must, as a business, as an organization. So there is what you call your data subjects rights request. So your data subjects now have rights. Okay, and you can go to the Home Office, you can go to HMRC, you can go to any of these big organizations or your current employer to say, okay, I want to know what information you hold about me, and they must let you know. So that is what your data subject right request. And so the privacy analyst is the one that sits down. This is one of the things I did as well, to say we need to put a mechanism in place for fulfilling such data subject requests. So if at all we had a request to say, okay, our marketing team, for instance, we have been processing information of thousands of people, and some of them want to opt out of marketing. Do we have a way of fulfilling that request? And if not, that's a gap. So you as a privacy analyst, you will help them to highlight this gap. And you can only highlight this gap or carry out this gap analysis if you know what the core principles or requirements of the GDPR are. And so that's why it's essential that you know that. Data governance is just really around, just ensuring that apart from being compliant, you have to look at it from a long-term perspective. How do we ensure that we operationalize all these data protection policies and procedures? How do we ensure that the way that we even deliver or run our projects, we are carrying out what you call your data protection impact assessment. We have, like I said, we have 8 regions, 60 countries. We need to have someone who is in charge, who's looking after, the way that we process personal data of customers and employees across the board. And so that governance is very important, so that organizations they know they have a handle of that data ecosystem, who's handling what. And also, if you have maybe you've got a branch in let's say in France, okay, and then you've got another branch in Germany. Is there consistency in the way that you are, your data protection policies are and the way that you're processing? Or is it a case of those of us in France are probably using a different approach than those in Germany and all of that? So and all of this takes a lot of work. Now, I must tell you, we've been doing this for several years, and I can't tell you that we've, got it all figured out. Because especially if it's a multinational, especially if it's a big organization with operations around the world, with different legislations coming up. There is those in the US, there is Canada, there's South Africa, there's so many. So it is just having a more, a more centralized governance in place, which takes a lot of work. And that is what a privacy analyst will help an organization to do. Now, these things you cannot make them up, because there are frameworks that you can use to guide, thankfully. There's a NIST framework, there's a lot of frameworks there out there. You can read up about them, but you can also learn and get knowledge and skills around, and you can help an organization. Now, the DPIA is something we'll talk about when we're talking about that specific project that I want to talk about. The DPIA just means data protection impact assessment. And then policies and procedures, very important, data protection policies, privacy policies. So you'll be on websites and you see, maybe you see a little link there to say, here's a link to our privacy policy. Your privacy policy is just really, it's just been adhering to your transparency requirement of a GDPR. It just says you need to be upfront and transparent. You need to tell your consumers, people who visit your sites, people who do business with you, they need to be aware of how you're processing their data, how you're handling their data, how you're storing their data, how you're ensuring that you are protecting their data from, it being hacked or stolen and things like that. And so within a privacy policy, the data privacy analyst is the one that will sit with the organization to say, okay, let's look at all the areas, that we need to feed into our privacy policy. Let's look at whether we need to look at third party that we are doing work with, that we're sharing data with. Do we need to, call those third party vendors? Do we need to put them in the privacy policy and things like that? So essentially, it is just a way of you letting your users or consumers that visit your site aware of, what you have in place. And it then gives a lot of people, it gives that rest of my peace of mind or confidence to do business with you, because now they know that you are conscious of ensuring that their data is handled properly and things like that. And so that is one policy. And there are several policies. There are some internal policies that you also need to be aware of. Even as a privacy analyst, you're working with the organization to ensure that those policies are regularly being updated. Those policies are up to scratch. They are, following industry standard templates and things like that. And also they are being socialized across your data ecosystem, across your employee. So your staff know that there is what you call your acceptable use policy, because let's say, for instance, you're using laptops, there also has to be things like ensuring that, you have maybe strong password, what do you call them, policies in place, and people are adhering to it. For us as a travel company, we get people calling on the phone to book holidays. Before I joined, we have massive call centers across 8 regions, and we found that some of these call center agents are writing people's information on sheets of paper. Sometimes they forget and they go home for the day, and that piece of paper may be on the table. So we had to introduce what we call a clear desk policy, which was something that, of course, the data privacy analyst helped with, and it was socialized across the business to say, at the end of the day, once it's 5 o'clock and you are clearing your desk, you need to get that sheet of paper into the shredder, because that shredder is secure, and we dispose of those in a secure manner. And all of those policies, there's so many of them, so a data privacy analyst is the person that will sit with your business, sit with the organization to put those policies in place. GDPR talks about ensuring that you have technical and organizational measures in place. We will cover that in a minute. Now, becoming a privacy analyst, what are the steps to take? First of all, I think I already mentioned, you have to acquire that knowledge of the GDPR. You need to understand what are the core principles of the GDPR. What are the requirements? Because if you don't know, you can't support an organization to become compliant with the GDPR. And so you've got to know it. Now, you don't have to know all the 99 articles, like I said, but the core principles are very important. CCPA is just for US. Like I said, if you have an understanding of how the GDPR works, getting other legislation, helping organizations to be compliant to other legislations like the CCPA would just be an easy one, like it was for me. Okay, so that knowledge, you've got to have it. That background understanding of the GDPR is a must. Okay, to become a privacy analyst. Then professional certifications. Now, these days you find some job descriptions, some jobs out there that are saying is a must, but back in the days it wasn't. And then there are still jobs that you get that you don't need a certification. However, it is good to have, because as you get that, it gives that credibility. Plus, as you're preparing for the certification, of course, it increases your knowledge on that subject matter. So having a certification is very important. Your IAP is just your International Association of Privacy Professionals, which I'm a member of, and you can become a member so that you just, you're getting, not understanding, you're reading up. There's a lot, it's very busy. There's always one thing happening or the other. So joining that membership is always good, and you'll be within that network as well. And then also opportunities come. So that's also important. Then the most important is gaining experience, gaining that hands-on, because even if you decide to memorize the 99 articles of the GDPR and you cannot, you can't implement it. You can't, it is just theoretical knowledge, and you're just like, oh, I know this, I know. Can I tell you, when I first started, I knew these principles. I will say Article 5 says this, Article 30 says this, but guess what? I was always being faced with, how can you interpret that to help us? How does that relate to the business? So it is not just having theoretical knowledge, but how can you apply that knowledge to help that organization to be compliant? And so it's important that you have that hands-on, you gain that experience. And that's something that there are a few ways you can do that. You can, because I think some churches at that time, even my church then, was sort of working towards GDPR compliance. You could volunteer to say, okay, I'm in the process of, getting this, becoming a privacy analyst, and I want to gain hands-on experience. Can I, work with you, to at least I know I've learned, I know what GDPR means. Can and it could be a charity, it could be different ways to pick the experience, or you can come and join us. We've got projects to help you gain the experience. And then, of course, there are transferable skills, important, very, very important as well, and looking at opportunities. So the key thing, you must understand what the GDPR, and you must know it, those core principles of the GDPR. What are the GDPR requirements? Very essential. Get certifications if you can, and then gain hands-on experience and look at other opportunities. Now, same on this slide, I've got your technical skills. Now, even though I will talk a little bit about, somebody asked me about cyber, a few of you, in fact, talked about cybersecurity as it relates to data privacy. I'll talk about that in a minute. So your data privacy analyst doesn't really need to be technical, to be quite honest. I think I've already mentioned, you can see it's all around reading and getting understanding. If you know how to read, you can just understand policies and things like that. So you don't have to have that technical depth just yet. But of course, if in the future you want to go via that very technical route to working with maybe the security arm, that's a different ball game. But when you're starting out, you don't need to be that technical. You just need to understand, okay, looking at how you can help, look to review corporate policies. How can you help them to update their privacy policy in line with what the GDPR really looks at? And also understanding how to carry out a gap analysis. Hopefully, time permits, I will show you. I'll do a run through, because that's very essential. So you join an organization today, you've done all of this, and they say, okay, the first thing you want to do, or what's the first thing you want to do? The first thing you want to do is carry out a gap analysis. Now, a gap analysis is really to assess their compliance or their maturity posture. Now, a lot of people started a few years ago. Some organizations have left it, because, oh, nothing's happened. We are not so big. It's the Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, all those guys who have been in the press, they're the ones. And so you find a lot of organizations sort of, backpedaling until something happens and everybody starts sitting up again. And so you will find that when you go into an organization, some of them will be high up there in terms of how mature they are with regards to compliance posture. So your gap assessment or your audit or gap analysis is really, okay, where are you? And you use their different frameworks you can use as a benchmark to carry out that gap assessment or gap analysis. Now, you would ask them, okay, do you have a record of person activity? Do you have compliance, consent on your websites, and a few other things, which I'll cover in a minute, and all of those things. And then if they say yes, fine, no, you then identify the gaps. Now, based on that gap analysis that you have done, you can then provide a recommendation to say, okay, you've got these gaps, you've got to start working on them. So I will show you also one of the projects that we worked on. The team, at the end of the day, they gave us some recommendations and we are working towards that. And that's what most organizations are doing at the moment. Okay. So I think I've already talked about the role of a data privacy analyst. You're just supporting, an organization to become compliant, with data privacy regulations. Really, that's essentially what it is, because organizations are afraid of fines. If something happened now, let me give you the example of that person, that staff that lost their laptop and stuff like that. Now, that department of ours was actually assessed. So we got someone come in, and the first thing they would ask you, where are you with regards to how compliant are you? How far gone in your compliance journey are you? What have you done? Are your staff trained? Are they aware of how they need to be, how they need to handle personal data? Like, for instance, somebody taking out a hard disk that has thousands of records, that actually goes to show that maybe that employee is not trained, and all of these things. So all of these things should have been done. And you, the privacy analyst, you are the one that will say, we need to put this in place. We need to put that in place. The GDPR says we must have this, we must have that, and we must have that. Okay, so you are supporting that organization to ensure that they're compliant, because if there's an incident tomorrow, that's the first thing they will look at. What have you done? What do you have in place? So I, as the head of the department, I had to sit with that department, to help them to put together a report to say, yes, we have this, yes, we have this, yes, we don't have this, yes, we're working on that. And based on what you are able to present, they can determine the level of fine that you get. So if you now come back to say, oh, we don't have, our employee are not trained, we don't have right safeguards in place, we don't have this, we don't have that, that means you have disregarded what those requirements are. And what that means, you can be met with a heavy fine. But if they can see that you've got things in place, you could go with a slap on the wrist or a minimal fine and things like that. So that's why it's very important that, you as a privacy analyst, you can push and help an organization to put those things in place. The privacy analyst is the one that helps the whole data mapping, like I mentioned, just ensuring that, okay, we know where our data sits. We know how data is flowing inbound and outbound. We know the assets. So I had to sit down, I'm sure over 30-something assets that had data. So we needed to, I use a visual representation to say, these are the core systems that we have data that is sitting, data that is being processed, and all of that. So that privacy analyst, you will sit down with an organization to help them do that, so that, in future, if somebody, for instance, says, okay, I want to exercise my right as a data subject, and I want to know what data you hold on file. This was something we even had. And so we went to this record of person activities, and we're able to say, okay, marketing data for this brand is in this system and that system and that system. And we collate that together, and we are able to send it to that data subject in a machine readable format, which is in line with the GDPR requirements. So you are helping that organization to carry out that data mapping or data flow mapping. And you're also reviewing policies, data protection policies, of course, nothing outside of that. It'll be anything that has to do with data protection and privacy. So you're helping them ensure that those policies are in place and they are regularly being updated as and when due. And then the fourth one, this is just a few, I just call the 4 key elements. You're also carrying out what you call a privacy impact assessment. Now we've talked about how important it is that we think about the privacy of our consumers. And so everything that we do, we need to, like, I sit down with the tech team and I say, guys, okay, let's look at these assets, this information, these systems, this software, these applications that we're using. what privacy considerations have we talked about? Have we put in place? So we had to put a mechanism based on what you call your DPIA. I'll talk about that. Hopefully there's time to say for every project, whether IT related or process change related, if it's going to be touching on information that belongs to our consumers or our employees, we've got to carry out a data protection impact assessment called DPIA. There is a framework that guides you. Now, all of these things I'm saying are not things you will make up. You've got framework, you've got templates to guide you as a privacy analyst, but then you will say, okay, we need to put that in place so that all projects, as they start, they must go through a DPIA. So, and what that means is once you've done that, it will now say, okay, before this software or this application goes live, you need to make sure we've got this thing in place. We've got a way of encrypting data that is in transit. We have to have encryption when data is at rest, and all of those things that will come from your DPIA. And there are frameworks that you can use to carry out a DPIA. And this is what the privacy analyst does as well. So that's, and some jobs you will find that they need a privacy analyst just to help them put together a DPIA framework. And that's what one of the projects we finished in SCL, and people that have worked on that project have gotten jobs. It might just be that might just be the whole one single element, because it is so broad. You can't be expected to do everything. My very first privacy analyst consultant role, all they wanted me to do was to help them carry out your data discovery. That was what that role was. But of course, the role now grew, and it became me leading the whole department and doing other things. But those core areas are quite important that you can, pick up skills and understanding. Now, this is just an example from way back, job opportunities. So if, and this is entry level, you can actually get in 55K a year, or you could actually get in, my first role was $450 a day, and I'd only done what, 4 to 6 months. I just learned, and so you could get in that from that end as well, or £500 a day, or you could actually even become. One of the reasons I asked if there was anybody already in tech, so whether you're a business analyst or project manager looking to pivot into the privacy space, that is something that you can explore as well, because I've worked with project managers who are just focused on implementing GDPR programs or privacy programs, and that is their niche. And they are known for that, and they just build on that, and they are, before you know it, on £600-700 a day, helping massive organizations to implement their privacy programs and things like that. So you could be a business analyst at the moment looking to specialize, looking at an area that is not too technical, that you can specialize and be an expert in. This is one area to explore. Now, this is a success story of one of the ladies within our program who works with me closely. I think she started off as a business analyst, but then she told me she wanted to get into the privacy space because she had a law background. So that's another area. So maybe your background from Nigeria, from back home, from wherever, probably is in law, and you're looking at, okay, I want to break into tech. I want to go via a not so technical route. This is something you can explore, because the fact that you have that on your CV will open the eyes, or to get some eyes popping to say, okay, she's got that law background, and then she's got the privacy bit as well. That one is a catch. So she had a law background and wanted to just follow that path. And that's how she got into, at the end of the day, I think she had like 2 jobs, and she's had several contracts along the way, just from, working with us. And, right now she's just flying. So that is one success story there. How we do you for time? Well, okay, let me go into the meat. I will quickly check any message. Jonathan, okay, I'm not sure what the yes is about, but hey, that's fine. Let's quickly go. Now, I asked, okay, a few people, I think it was about GDPR, isn't it? Yeah, right, okay. So those of you who have said yes, that's brilliant. I'm sure within your current organization, or maybe way back then, you must have heard about the GDPR and all of that. So the GDPR really talks about personal data handling. And it's not every data, okay? It is personal information of living individuals. And that is what the GDPR sort of looks after or focuses on. And GDPR, like I said, is your general data protection regulation. And essentially, it is looking at a risk-based approach. It's really risk to you, risk to the data subjects. Now, if your data got into the hands of the wrong people, that is very risky because your information could be used to commit what you call a theft. They could use that to just use your information for different things, really. Imagine if someone had your first name, your last name, your maybe your what you call it, your postcode and all of that. Identity fraud can be, they can use that information to commit identity fraud and things like that. And so it is really being mindful, looking at a risk-based approach to ensure that organizations have that onus on them to put the right safeguards in place, to make sure that they are protecting these systems, these assets that store the data. And even as the data is in transit, ensuring that the right safeguards are in place, ensuring that their employee, the staff, the people processing this data know about the right data handling procedures and processes, as it were. And essentially, that is what GDPR just said to you and me. Hey, you've got control of how your data is being processed. It is no longer okay for organizations to use your data as they deem fit or as they please without thinking twice and things like that. Okay, so it really relates to natural persons, which I have said, and data elements or pieces of data that can be used to identify you. And they may be your name, like you can see there, your address, your IP address. So you are going on to different sites, they're dropping cookies, they're picking up your IP address. That is GDPR data right there. So on those sites where they don't have a cookie banner, they don't have a way of, managing what you call it, your preference management center, where you can say, okay, maybe you can only drop cookies that are absolutely necessary. I don't want marketing cookies and tracking cookies and all of these things. So some organizations have that and a lot of organizations don't. And so you find that a lot of organizations are actually not compliant. They haven't been found out yet, but that is essential information. That is GDPR data. Your racial identity, your biometric data, your religious affiliation, your sexual orientation and more. Those are what we call GDPR data. And this is the data that GDPR really cares about or focuses about. Now, I mentioned earlier, so as a privacy analyst, let's say you get that job today or tomorrow, and you're asked to, okay, maybe the organization has just started. Where do we start from? They ask you. This is one that you can use. And is the ICO, that's what the Information Commissioner's Office, which was the pre-Brexit supervisory authority within the UK, came up with the 12 steps. And this was what I used when I started out within my organization. First thing, awareness is very important, because if something was to happen tomorrow and they come as sort of auditing you and saying, why did this happen and things like that, they will ask you, what is your training policy? How aware, how regular. So we would have like weekly awareness comms on our various, platforms that that employees sort of are on our intranet. We are dropping different things around data protection, around privacy, so that our staff are aware. So that is one. So you first of all start with the awareness. So you ask them, how do you have something in place? How regular, how frequent are you carrying out this awareness, communication and stuff like that? And then remember I talked about data discovery, information that you hold across your ecosystem, whether it's data that is coming in or data that is going out. So that is something that the ICO has recommended that organizations must do. They need to know. And it is in line with what you call Article 30. And then also your privacy information. I talked about your privacy notices, your privacy policy. So you will ask them, do you have a privacy policy in place? If you've got several websites, have you, and across different regions, have you considered all the legislations across these jurisdictions when you're putting your privacy policy in place, and all of those things? You'll ask them. If they don't, you as a privacy analyst will help them using there's several templates. You don't have to sit down and draft it yourself. No, there's a lot you can use, okay? Individual rights. I mentioned the fact that as an individual, you have a right to your data, to how your data is being processed. You can get to an organization and say, I want to exercise my right. I want you to delete. There's your data deletion request. They can, we got a lot of that. And where people will say, okay, I want you to delete data, you hold on me, and we've got to do that. We've got to put a mechanism to fulfill that request. And if we don't, then we're in breach right there. And that's that employee or that consumer could actually report us if we went back to say, oh, sorry, we don't have a mechanism in place, and so we can't fulfill your request, we are in trouble. And so as a privacy analyst, you can then tell the organization, hey guys, we've got to put something in place. So that was one of the things I had to put in place, and it was on all our brand website. And so you've got to have that way of managing your data subject requests. And then you also have to help them to say, okay, we process all this information. We have marketing teams, we have HR teams, we have our travel, we have our contact centers, and blah, blah, blah. Now we've got to identify how we are processing this data. Are we processing in a lawful manner according to those GDPR principles? GDPR has what you call lawful basis for processing. There's consent, there's legitimate interest. I'll go into all of that, but you can read more about that. So that is one element as well. So if the answer is no, you will now have to recommend, okay, guys, we've got to put this and that in place. Consent, I've already mentioned. Are you processing data that belongs to minors, to children? If you are, how are you handling that? What safeguards do you have in place? How are you obtaining consent from the people that have parental responsibility if needed, just depending on how that data is being used? Data breach incidents, do you have a policy? Do you have a procedure for managing data breaches? We had to put that in place because we had some data breach incidents, like I mentioned before. So those policies, those steps we had to adhere to, we had to follow to say, step one, if there's an incident, it has to be reported within 24 hours of knowing. And when it's done, we initiate our data breach procedure, which would mean informing our information security officer, informing our CTO, and all of those things. So you would have those steps and procedures in place, which you trigger in case of a data breach incident. So that is also a requirement. There must be a policy and there must be a procedure right there. Your data privacy by design, DPI, I already mentioned that. Your DPO, data protection officers, that's something that is also important. So I'm the named data protection officer for my organization. That can take a whole day to say, what do you need to become a data protection officer? Those of you that will join this program, we will go into, I will tell you how you can pick up, skills, how you can do some quick courses, and you can put them on your CV if you want to even become a data protection officer and things like that. And then, then also, if you're working for a multinational, you have to look at what you call international transfer policy. So for us, because like I said, we're across 8 regions, we know that as a travel company, you are sending information to maybe your tour guide who's abroad somewhere, or people process data. Sorry, people book holidays, they book flight, they book airport pickup, and all of those data, and you're now sharing this data to third parties. And so we had to have, and these third parties may be across the board, for instance, across the border, and so there has to be a policy in place. There has to be an agreement in place. So we have an agreement. And so once we onboard a third party, a new vendor, it might be a tech vendor, it might be a marketing vendor, it might just be somebody that we're sharing data with, I will always ask them to do a DPIA. I will always ask them for me to look at the policy to say we need to have a data processing agreement in place. Within that agreement, you're now ensuring that both parties are aware of, what is on them, what obligation is on them, whether as a data controller or as a data processor. There is no time to go into all that detail. So you see that 90 minutes will not do this justice. You want to know more, you've got to come onto the program, and there's a lot that you can cover. Now, this is an example of IBM's pathway. So when you're carrying out when you start as a privacy analyst, you want to look at, when I mentioned the fact that you want to assess where that organization is in terms of compliance posture. You want to say how ready are they, how compliant are they. Now, and I also mentioned you are not expected to make up anything. There are frameworks, there are modules that you can use. I personally used, this is a framework that I used, and these things are being, modified and evolve over time. But this is something that is standard and you can use. First of all, these are the phases: your assess, your design, your transform, operate, and conform phase of that exercise. And essentially, it's just carrying out your risk assessment. I talked about that as well, your privacy assessment across the board to say, okay, where are you? Where are you? Do you have a readiness roadmap? Where do you operate? Which departments do you have that are processing personal data? Where you are where's your business located? Do you have a business in France, in Germany, in EU, in the UK, and all of those things? That's something that you will do, and you help them put a roadmap to say, okay, this is that data discovery we mentioned, and how is that data flowing? So you carry out that assessment. At the end of the day, what you have is the outcome is your roadmap to say, okay, based on the assessment that you've done, now you could use, I think back in the days, I used Excel and I did like a questionnaire. But like I said, now it's all automated. It's very easy. What you just do is you just maybe put the email of the person that you want to carry out that assessment or to answer or to respond. So those questions are pre-built. You can, kind of tweak it so that it is in line with that organization and it's not something that people don't understand. I had to do a lot of that, but, you can use these softwares and you just send it out to the email, they complete it, and it generates an assessment, a report, which you then use to say, okay, based on this assessment, we need to make sure that we have this technical and organizational measures in place. And we need to ensure that within the next, say, 6 to 12 months, we should have done X, Y, and Z. So my roadmap was something I was doing annually and reviewing every 6 months. So that's your assessment there. And the organization starts working across their various teams. Design is just like, okay, let's have a governance in place, because like I said, especially if it's a multinational, if it's an organization that cuts across different jurisdiction or different teams and even departments, you want to have a consistent center-led framework or governance in place to ensure that your employees are being trained and they are listening to the same information. They're listening to relevant information that, of course, applies to how they're handling data on their day-to-day and things like that. And all of that you need to put in place. For us, we started by doing like an annual, and then it became 6 monthly. And I think we're now going, like quarterly, just so that it's on top of mind. You're having those things in place and also ensuring that you're working with your privacy or your security team as well, because like I said, there are overlaps with privacy and security as well, so but these teams have to synergize, have to work together, and you now will say, okay, based on this that we've done, we need to have X, Y, and Z. The tech team, our DevOps team, you guys need to know about data protection, you guys need to know about data privacy, and this is things that you are reminding them of as they are working, as they are testing, as they are working through tech projects, non-tech projects. This is in place. You embed that in the culture of the organization, and that is you helping them, to put those things in place. Transform is just means, okay, we are still doing, now we know we've assessed, we've done a gap assessment, we've identified our gap areas, we know we need to put governance in place, we need to have an implementation plan, we have a roadmap, we want to be in a defensible position within, let's say, 12 months to a year or 2 years. Trust me, it never ends because it's a lot of work. So that's why it's an evergreen area to get into, because you will just be there 5 years, 6 years on that contract, and it just keeps rolling because there's always something to do as a privacy analyst. And you be like, when I first started, they said you can make this role what you want it to be, and that's exactly what I did. So all the policies and procedures have my name. There are things that I've spearheaded along the line, and you can just keep going because it's a lot of work. And okay, you execute all relevant business processes, monitor security and privacy using your technical organizational measures that have been identified from the initial stages, and ensuring ongoing monitoring and reporting, because that was one area that we also struggled, because yes, everybody was talking about being compliant, and so they wanted to be in a defensible position. They wanted to do a few things, but they didn't put anything in place for ongoing monitoring, and because it's important. Because trust me, people leave. So maybe you have trained, your staff on how they're meant to handle personal data and things like that, and they leave. The new ones come. If you don't have those monitoring procedures in place, maybe the new people will just carry on and they're not aware. So we had to put things in place to say all new joiners had to go through an initial training. They had to go through X, Y, and Z. They had to do this, they had to do that. So we keep monitoring and we keep updating, all the things that we have put in place. So it's not just being compliant, tick a box, but it is something that is ongoing as you go along, as it were. Okay, so you may need to cram. So like I said, you don't need to cram all the 99 articles. It's really just knowing these core principles. Oh, we're not good for time. Lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. So please go into the ICO. I will probably pop some links there, but you can go on Google, and the core principles. First one, as the GDPR says, you must process data in a lawful organization. So not you, processors and controllers. So if you're a processor or you're a controller, you're expected to process data in a lawful, fairness, and transparent manner. And I've already mentioned some examples of how, one way to kind of translate that or to interpret that is to check that, okay, when site visitors land on your website, is there a privacy policy that tells them, upfront, how you process what you use their data for, how it's been processed, what safeguards you have in place, and things like that. And also, before you even use information, are you obtaining consent, which is a lawful way that you can process data? And if people are giving you consent, that's fine. And can they revoke consent? Do you have a mechanism? If a data subject says, I want to revoke my consent, I want to opt out, have you got that automated? Or even if it's not automated, you have a manual way to do that. So, and all of those things, that's one. Then purpose limitation, that's another thing. Back in the days, you find that businesses will obtain data forever, indefinitely. And there is that popular phrase, oh, we keep it just in case we need it. When I started working as a consultant, and I sat down with a lot of our departments and I said, marketing. So I see that you have, some information have been there for like 10, 15 years. Are these people still engaging? Some of them are not. Some have even died. And GDPR talks about ensuring data integrity. So it just means that the data that you're holding needs to be refreshed. And so you need to also ensure that you are only processing data for what you need it for. Don't keep it indefinitely. It is a breach. You shouldn't do that, because another risk also to that, if you look at it from a risk-based approach, if that database, or wherever it is, that asset, that information asset, that system that is storing that data gets hacked, something happens today, and you've got thousands or even millions of people's information, and someone gets into the wrong hands, that is risk, and even on you. Because now you've got to inform the data subjects that, hey, we had a breach incident. And I'm sure you would have seen all of these things. They're all in the press of the big ones, Facebook and the likes, where there's an incident and they have to report it because it's sensitive data and it's a lot of data that affects a lot of people. But guess what? If the data that you're holding is minimal, it's also not as sensitive, then the risk is lower on the data subject and even on you if you are, of course, fined, and they would, of course, assess things before they give you any penalty and things like that. So we always advise that only data that is needed should be collected. I'm on the website and I want to place an order, and you need my name and my address and maybe my phone. You may not need my phone number, or maybe you do. And then you now start asking me for things like maybe dietary requirements or some data that is not even related to this because you don't need it. But you find out that you will fill some forms and they will ask you for your color of your eyes, the color of your hair, biometric data that you don't need. So that is now GDPR is saying there is a principle around purpose limitation. Only collect data that you absolutely need. Storage limitation as well is still around, only storing what you absolutely need, and make sure that you are minimizing the data. I talked about integrity and confidentiality and accountability. These are core principles, and I think I've just broken them down here. Your lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. Now, they're out there. You can read more. I'll ask you to read more. If you're really serious about this career path, go and read up GDPR. Go to ICO, Google ICO, and look at the GDPR principles so you can know more about them. And I think I mentioned all of these things about you being upfront. Now, nobody is saying don't collect information. GDPR is not saying don't do business, okay? But you've got to be upfront and transparent and let your users, let your consumers know what the data that you're obtaining from them is used for. Now, I talked about the lawfulness of processing. And according to the GDPR, I think there's about 6 of them. One is consent. So as a privacy analyst, you will sit with the business to say, okay, this particular processing activity, let's look at which of these lawful bases we can rely on. Okay, so I sat down and they will argue consent, no consent, legitimate interest, and all of those things. So you'll find businesses push back a lot. So you've got to know your onions. You've got to know which one to use when. So your consent, normally the advice is rely on consent as the last resort, because it is trickier, okay, to rely on consent, because you can use something like legitimate interest, for example. So if somebody, for instance, someone is trying to draw on the screen, I'm not sure why. You get the slide, don't worry, sorry, not the slides, you get the recording. And these things are outside in public domain. You can get them anywhere, they're not new. So legitimate interest is now, for instance, you've signed up for this program or for this taster. And for me, that is an indication that you're interested in what we offer, okay? And so we do not require that you take a consent to process your information. It just means that we obtain your name and your email address so we can send you the Zoom link, okay? And some of you may have put your phone numbers, and we obtain that phone number probably because we might call you, and we would have put a link to the privacy policy to say you can opt out. You can say after this, no more. Now, on the legitimate interest, it just means legitimate interest on you, who's a consumer, and the fact that it's also of interest to us because we need this information to carry out the purpose for which we have asked it for. So you can rely on legitimate interest as a good reason or as a lawful basis in these sort of scenarios. And so you, as a privacy analyst, you need to understand when should legitimate interest be used, when should consent be used, when should contracts, for those of you who have signed up on, to our program, for example, it is contractual because you want us to give you this training and all that you're gaining from us, and hence we need your information in order for us to deliver this service. And so it's contractual, and so we do not need to rely on consent. So you see, there are several lawful bases, but you need to know when to use what. Okay. And vital interest could be, a lot of times it might just be, for instance, maybe you want to, let me use the example of the ambulance. Maybe somebody, you call an ambulance as an example, and maybe maybe a child, I don't know. Let's say somebody calls an ambulance and they're trying to protect your life and you cannot talk. And the person that calls the ambulance doesn't know so much, or maybe just knows a little bit about you. they can, use that. They don't need to obtain consent because they need that. They need to save your life, if that makes sense, to protect your life with that information that is used, and maybe that ambulance person then takes you to A&E. The ambulance person will have to give the doctor some detail about you, and so you can't say, oh, no, please, you need to get my consent, blah blah. So there's a few scenarios there, but then you also need to look at which one of these lawful bases can we apply. You've got your public task, you've got your legal obligation. If, for instance, you're going through border, you're traveling, and they say, can I have your passport? You can't say, no, I can't give it to you. No, they've got to take that information because there's a law that says you've got to provide evidence that you have a right to travel from this country to the other and things like that. So there are several lawful bases that you can look at and explore, but you as a privacy analyst need to know, and then you can advise that business to say, oh, okay, we don't need consent because we've got a lawful basis, or we've got this legitimate interest, based on the fact that these people want something from us, they're interested in the products, and we need this information to give them what they're asking for and things like that, and that might just be enough. And so you don't need to say, give me consent in all instances, and we always will say consent should be the last resort. Okay, so purpose limitation, I think I already mentioned. I'm going to go quickly. Data minimization, you should always advise the business to say, only collect what is absolutely necessary because it reduces the risk in case of a data breach incident. If there's a data breach incident tomorrow and you don't have like credit card data, you don't have sensitive data, you have just name, emails, the risk is lower. And GDPR always say, always look at things from a risk-based approach. Well, what is a high look at, worst case scenario? If something was to go wrong tomorrow, what's the impact it will have on your data subject? And so you should think about that when you are collecting data or when you are putting those safeguards in place and things like that. So don't collect, it says that don't collect data only if it's absolutely needed, and that's your data minimization. Data storage as well, we talk about data retention policy. So you find that organizations have data from 20 years. Some of those information are no more valid. Some of those people have even died, but it's in their database, it's just gathering dust. And, it just says, one, it's even good for you to clear out data because it frees up your storage space as an example. And then you know that you have data of people who actually want to engage with you. So we had to do that. We had to do a cleanup of a lot of our systems that have held data for years when GDPR came in. And a lot of organizations had to do what you call reconsent. And so that's why you would have received some emails saying, if you want us to still retain you. In fact, I think some organizations, some recruitment agents, I think I still see those emails coming in and they say, oh, you've been on our file for X number of years as a result or part of our GDPR procedure, blah, blah, we expect to review or update this every year or 2 years. We do it 2 yearly. So they send out a reconsenting email to their database and people will say, okay, I'm happy for you to still retain, or no, I want to opt out. And those that say no, you opt them out, and that is it. So that is, and then of course, those that you have collected their data for, you do what you have a data retention policy in place to say, for instance, those of you who have registered for this data, we are starting a project in the new year that allows us to look at a data retention policy. And so we can say, when we collect information for the purpose of, sending you a Zoom link to join a free taster, we will keep your data maybe only for a certain number of months. And then we will reach out to you again to say, would you like us to still keep your data and things like that. So that is a way of, getting your data retention going. So there might be a policy, and there's what you call a data retention schedule. That was something that I also had to help my business put in place, or my organization put in place. And so that is it. So you've got to ensure that data integrity is something that is on top of mind. Accountability is so important. So whether you are a data controller or a data processor, you are held accountable for the data that you hold of your consumers to ensure compliance with all the principles that we have talked about. Okay, so you've got to ensure that you put data protection measures in place to demonstrate compliance. Right, conscious of time, I put this is a busy one because I've had a few people really talk about cybersecurity. So if you are here, quickly, we're going to round up soon. In the chat, have you thought about getting into cybersecurity? And are you here because you want to explore, you want to see if this is a route that you can go via the data privacy route into cybersecurity? Type yes in the chat if that's you. And I'll go straight into it. So cybersecurity, yes, a lot of people know more about that. But one caveat, one thing I want to put there is cybersecurity is more complex in this, not complex, somewhat complex, more technical. And I would say that if we were to do a cybersecurity v privacy, I would say your privacy or data privacy is easier to get into because it is not as technical. As you can see, it's a lot about looking at policies and procedures and knowing those core principles and helping organizations to embed that to be compliant and things like that. Of course, as you grow, as you develop, as you increase, advance as a privacy analyst, you might do a bit more, of course, a bit more technical bits in the sense that you might be working, supporting technical teams. So like I was sitting within tech, and so I was working very closely with the tech team. And so when, for instance, there is an application, there is a software, we're, trying to introduce an integration with an existing system, I will work with them to look at, okay, what have we done DPIAs? Do we have encryption? And then I work closely with our CISO and all of those things. So you may, but as you advance, but as you start out, you may not require that technical depth. Whereas with cybersecurity, it is a bit more technical to get into. And also it requires more I would say certifications and exams, because there's a lot of frameworks and a lot of things that you need to know about to carry out, those audits and to ensure that you help an organization to have those security standards. There's so many, okay? And so, but I must tell you that these two functions overlap. And I see that on the job. So we've got a security team. We've got our head of, our CISO, Chief Information Security Officer. I'm working with him all the time. But when we first started, the security team were like doing their own silo business and just looking at, okay, do we have a SOC? What does a security operations center? That's your SOC. Is that in place? What secure are we having our penetration testing done on most of our systems, and what frameworks are we using? Are we using NIST? Are we using all sorts, ISO standards? So with cybersecurity, there's quite a bit there, whereas with data privacy, not so much. And so what I normally would say when I come across people who want to get into cybersecurity, and I say you can actually get in, first of all, via the data privacy route, because it's not that technical. And guess what? From what I've put there now, most security teams are now being expected to have understanding of data protection and privacy. So it's no more working in silos. So recently we were already saying, okay, we need to synergize with our security and our privacy and compliance, because one of the requirements of the GDPR is that organizations must ensure they have TOM, so your technical and organizational measures in place. Some of these technical measures will touch on your security elements or your security infrastructure. Okay, and so if, for instance, you are in the security arm and you don't know so much about, okay, how data protection works, what you need to put in place and things like that, you may be like, oh, where do I get it from? But of course, what happens is you now feed back to the privacy team to say, okay, And that's what happens. They will say, okay, what does the GDPR want us to do? Or what are the data protection elements that we need to put, or the privacy considerations we need to make? And so you find those teams kind of touching and overlapping and working together. But guess what? If you are somebody who already starts with, you know about data protection, you know about those data privacy considerations, and then you now say, okay, I know that, I've gotten knowledge, I've gotten experience, I know what to do, and I want to then pivot into cybersecurity, you are going to be heavily sought after by your cybersecurity teams, because now they will see that you have that data protection background, you understand data protection, you understand, how the principles work, you understand the requirements, you understand the framework, you understand those privacy elements and things like that, and you come on, into the security team, you will be someone that they'll be going to. So they will not need to go to the data privacy team, because you are in the security team with that skill set or knowledge of data protection and privacy. So I would say, and now I think I put somewhere, I came across that, I don't know if it's in the next slide, where, okay, no, I said, yeah, so your IAP, so one of Byron John, the Johnson is your International Association of Privacy Professionals, very senior person, says that you may not be privacy policy, or you may not be privacy policy experts, but any cybersecurity or InfoSec professional absolutely should expect privacy to touch their job requirements meaningfully. So what we are doing now, even for our security teams, we are taking them through GDPR training. We are taking them through that awareness, so that as they are looking at those, because security touches on the systems, as it were, and just ensuring that you've got, the right security elements in place and safeguards and stuff like. So talking about the system, whereas with GDPR, it talks about the data. And some of this data will be stored in this system. So you see those overlaps there. And so if you want to go in via a not so technical route, I will say go via data privacy. And then once you have done, you can even do a year or 2 years if you like, or even 6 months, and say, okay, now I've worked on I've gotten into privacy, I have an experience, I've got it on my CV, I want to now pivot into cybersecurity. And you, because of that background and knowledge and that experience that you have, you will be hotcake for a security team. Okay, so that's kind of how I wanted you to look at it. So cybersecurity, of course, is more technical. There are certifications for you to get a foot in the door. You would have done some, and I'm not scaring you. You will need to do some certifications quite a bit. And then maybe you'll be able to demonstrate, you can carry out audits, what frameworks to use, blah, blah, all those things need to be on your CV and things like that before, someone will hire you and things like that. Whereas with a privacy analyst, I had somebody I'm going to call on now. I'm so sorry, time has gone. She only just came on to do a business analyst course and worked on a privacy, a GDPR compliance project. She hadn't done any certification or whatever, and she was able to get into a privacy analyst role, so I would say it's easier, to get in, and it is a route that you can explore to cybersecurity. I will call Faith if you're still on here. Let me see questions. Yeah. Okay, not an IT/technical person. So please, which route is best for me? Yeah, so you can go via privacy, like I said. So yeah, privacy is not so technical, I think, from what you've seen. Right. We are so God, I knew this was going to be much. So Faith, let me see you. Okay. Can we come to let me see. Someone has their hands raised. Chinam So King. Okay, go on. What's your question?
What was the professional exam for privacy data? Or is it just once you get it and do the practice and you're good to go? Is there like a professional body to join for it?
Yeah. I don't know if you joined in the beginning. I talked about IAP. So your so there's your CIPPE, your CI. So your now I don't want you to be hung up on certifications. Yeah, to be honest, because It is really, can you do the job? It's really picking up the skills. It's really finding a way to gain hands-on experience, first of all. But you can do your, I think, what is CIPP? Is it Chartered Institute for Privacy Professionals in the EU? So Google CIPPE or CIPM. Those are certifications now that you get, and you find some jobs that would require that, but it's not mandatory. I'm not going to go back, sorry. It's not mandatory. It's more a case of, okay, let me understand these principles. Let me do my research. Let me join a course that will show me how to, learn this thing and do a work on a project. So I told you guys, I did just 4 months on a mini project, and that's what helped me to pivot. So it's really, at the end of the day, it's not how many certifications you have, especially if you're just getting in. It's not, oh, do you have, yeah, you have them, fine, but do you know how to apply what you have learned? That's pretty much what they're looking for, or what organizations are looking for, as it were. I hope that makes sense. So there are, so go on to Google, see, maybe I might drop some, I drop some links. Go on to and look at CIPPE, CIPM. Those are the key industry standard ones. Go on to OneTrust. If there's time, I'll drop that again. Go on to onetrust.com. So OneTrust has free training that they do. I don't know if they still do it, but they were doing a lot of it. So you can go on, and if you've got gone through any of those OneTrust certifications, or I think usually it's a day, but like 8 hours, so it's really intense. But when you finish, you now get a certificate of completion, which you can put on your LinkedIn. OneTrust is the biggest, they're known. They're one of the first people that came into the party. So what helped me to get my job as well was, so far, is I'm a OneTrust expert, so I can help an organization set up OneTrust and all of that. And that's something we teach in the program anyway, too. All of that. So you can go on to and look at OneTrust and see what you can pick up as well. But really focus on, how can I gain hands-on experience? Yeah. Cool. Faith, over to you.
Okay. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
My name is Faith Omofuma. So Veronica, I believe you just want me to take them through what I did with SCL.
Yeah, so let me set a bit of context. So Faith came on, wanted to do business analysis, and then she went through the course. Then she worked on a GDPR compliance project, one of our projects, even though she grumbled, she didn't want to do it at the time, but she eventually did it.
Yes.
Yes, and that was kind of what helped her to get into where she is today. She's on her second contract. So I just want her to talk about that, and maybe briefly, because of time, talk about what you did, that sort of helped you to get into where you are today. Just very briefly because of time.
Okay, so I joined SCL July 2021. The first thing and the best thing Veronica did for me was to identify my transferable skills, bring them on board, and sort of position me in a way that I could succeed. So getting into the project, we did a theory aspect, and we went straight into the project to gain hands-on experience. It was very, very hands-on. Like everything she's telling you on here, you will get to do them by yourself. So one of the projects I worked on was GDPR compliance. And for this particular project, it was to make the website GDPR compliant, the company-wide, basically. So she already talked about some things from GDPR, and those things I did them. As a first-time user, you go on a website, there should be that pop-up message that says, we're capturing your data. This is how we use your data. So you click OK, or you click learn more if you don't understand it, and all of those things. So the company did not have that on their website. Those were the things we worked on. We used diagrams as well, not too technical, like she said, but something basic to understand Aziz meaning where they are presently and to be where they need to be GDPR wise. And so we put in, I was a business analyst on that project. I worked with a group of other team members. And basically, I worked on some documents like acceptable use policy, strong password policy. Those documents must be in place. And you see on a basic website, they have this privacy policy, cookie policy. Those things are all part of making the website GDPR compliant. And of course, she pointed me to the ICO website, the Information Commissioner's Office website. I learned a whole lot on there. And because you get to read about all these principles, she just narrated how they are used in principle and all of those things. So that project, in SEO, I spent like 6 months basically. So, but the GDPR project was one of them. And like she just mentioned, I wasn't too keen about it because I was like, to be honest, I was already telling her, Veronica, don't worry, I will not do GDPR. I will leverage on what I've done here, but it may not just be GDPR. And guess what? When I got 3 jobs, one of them was centered on GDPR. And funny enough, that was the one I went for. So it was quite interesting. It was in the education sector. And knowing about GDPR, what I did in SCL, like I said, was to make the company GDPR compliant, the website and all of those things. But on this, in the university where I worked, my first contract, there was another aspect to it. So they were working on a GDPR application remediation project, meaning there are different applications. So there's the application for accommodation of students. There's a separate application that deals with parking. There's a separate application that deals with tuition, all of those things. And you have to deal with those applications individually. So what kind of data do they collect? How do they collect this data? How do they process them? How do they store them? Are these data transferred to third parties? Those third parties, do they understand GDPR, even if they are not in the UK or Europe, all those sort of things. So it was GDPR, but a different aspect completely. But because I had a basic understanding from Sterling Careers, it was easy to flow. In fact, the interview, I was running my mouth like a public tap, and I'm sure they will be wondering if I'm the ICO's daughter or something, because I knew so much about GDPR from SCL, and it was easy for me to blend in. And getting onto the university, I was told this was, I was going to be working on the 3rd phase of the project. So now this is GDPR, you just think is one, all of these things, but it's very vast. And then they explained to me they are done phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 is the final part. And after then, they will need someone who is even knowledgeable to sort of maintain what Veronica explained, a privacy analyst, to maintain that system that they have, worked on. And then again, it was very interesting because my contract was renewed, but I got some other juicy offers. And as a very sharp Nigerian girl, I jumped over.
You like juicy offers, don't you?
I went for the more juicy one. But I was just telling Veronica this evening that in 2023, which is like the money-making year, I'm looking at taking a second role, and it's definitely going to be on GDPR because I loved everything about it. And like she said, it was not too technical, when I was working on it. So I can honestly manage both together, because what I'm doing now is more technical than this GDPR. GDPR, if you get into it, if you swim in it, trust me, you will love everything about it. You feel like you're doing something good, waking up to put a system in place, waking up to make sure the right things are in place, people's data are covered, companies are covered, they are not exposed, they will not be fined. You're just a part of a process that is working. So, and it's easy to delve in, but I tell you, I have no certification on GDPR, none at all. And even with the role I have, I keep getting recruiters call me on LinkedIn saying, I see you have this thing. And let me just go a bit wider. So SCL is not just about the hands-on project. That is one of the main things, but the whole package, oh my God. I always tell Veronica, I'm going to frame my CV and keep it somewhere like an award, because that CV has been doing me justice, So yeah, it's all encompassing. It's Veronica will not leave you hanging. No matter how large you are in the class, trust me, you will feel like you are alone, because every help you need, you will get it, even beyond SCL. It's like a community. It's like, I feel that brotherhood, even after I finish the training and I'm on to, other things, but that support is amazing. There's nothing beats it, to be honest. So basically, that's my story. I'm here, I'm in a good place. My eyes are still on GDPR because it's such a lovely place to be.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. I'm sure she can go on if you allow her. Okay. Thank you, Faith. So yeah, Faith's on a second contract now, and she's doing quite well. Didn't have a technical background when she started, but hey, look at her. Fine. Because of time, thank you very much, Faith, for sharing. I want to quickly just touch on something which I planned. So I'm going to share my screen again, and then you can ask any questions about joining if you want to join. So as a privacy analyst, I mentioned that one thing that you will be expected to do is to, can you see my screen? Is to, oops, sorry, go back. Is to, as a privacy consultant, is to carry out a gap analysis. So can you see my screen, sorry? Can you see the practical steps? Okay, as privacy consultant, okay. So this is an example, just from the NHS, is out there in public domain. So it's nothing, there's no classified information here. But I want to show you pretty much as a privacy consultant. So when you first get your role, how do you carry out a gap analysis? So Faith, one of the projects, I was going to show you a few other things behind the scenes that Faith worked on as her team within Sterling Creswell because of time, but I just wanted to show you this, and you can go and look at it for yourself. So even if you decide not to join this program and you want to start building your portfolio, when you start getting ready, you know, and getting your knowledge or understanding about this, you could go on here and have a look. So a gap assessment or gap analysis really is one. Remember I said the first most important thing or a step to take towards becoming a privacy analyst is to gain understanding of the GDPR principles, your data protection principles, because for you to be a functional privacy analyst, you've got to know what the GDPR says. You've got to know what its principles are for you to be able to support a business to become compliant. And so those principles were already mentioned. So we talked about lawfulness of processes. So using this as an example, if, for instance, you were in an organization that is small, when we started, we didn't have OneTrust, we didn't have any privacy management software. All I did was a Word document like this or an Excel. And you might decide that, okay, you want to start building that experience. Go to your church, go to a charity, a community that's small, and introduce GDPR. But of course, you should know the principles first. Do your research and say, okay, I want to start gaining experience that I can put on my CV. If I don't want to work, I don't want to join Veronica's program, maybe I can't afford it now, whatever. But you can start developing that. This is something that you can use. Excel, Word, all you need is these principles will be here on this column, on this side. So one, what are your data protection principles? So you ask them, okay, let's look at as an example, maybe looking at Faith's example, working in a university, they've got different departments processing data for different purposes. There's what you call your processing activities. So you can sit down and say, okay, let's start with marketing. Now, what do you use data, personal data that you collect for? And they say we used to send marketing campaigns or emails. We use, I don't know if people fill the contact us form, we collect their data and we do that. So all of that, you sit down and you make a record of them. Then for each one of these processing activities, you now say, what is the lawful basis? Do you know what GDPR, are we doing what GDPR expects us to do with regards to this processing? So one, your fairness, remember I mentioned those principles, your lawfulness, transparency, fairness. You talk about, okay, they might say, yeah, well, we are relying on, or we don't even know. They might say, no, we don't, tell us. So you will now look at it, you write it down and say, okay, based on what you guys have said here, we can rely on legitimate interest. But for this one, we can rely on consent, blah, blah. And then we now go on to the next step. Okay, well, we don't have a way of obtaining consent where consent is required. Faith mentioned on those websites. So if it's an organization that has a website that is processing EU data, they need to have a privacy policy. They need to have a way of obtaining consent. And if they don't, you now provide a recommendation to say what work is required. You need to ensure that on all our sites, we have a way of obtaining consent, or we have a privacy policy. So that's you helping them to carry out that gap analysis based on those principles. So here, so this column is what is the regulation asking you to do? What is the requirement according to GDPR? It says for this, you must have that. And then this is a consent. So you use this as a template to ask those questions. And based on the responses, where they have yes, that's fine. Where they have no, for instance, they have yes here. If it is fine, you say okay. If it needs, maybe updating or rework, you provide a recommendation. And where they have no, you say, okay, we need to have a data protection policy in place. We need to have a privacy notice on our website. We need to have X, Y, and Z. That is you, the privacy consultant, helping them to carry out a gap analysis, and the list goes on. So this is an example of one I found online. So this one, they have children, they process children's information. So you will now say, what does the GDPR, what is the GDPR requirement with regards to processing of data that belongs to minors and things like that. So this is an example. It's quite long. I can pop in the chat for you to go and have, but let me do that. You can have a look because we've got to go and it's frozen. Have a look at it and see what a typical gap. Sorry, where's chat now? What a typical gap analysis entails and what it looks like. I've popped that in the chat, so please click on it. And in your own time, I'm going to exit because of time. Stop sharing. Because of time, so I've popped that in the chat. Please have a look at it. That is where you start from. So as a privacy consultant, have a look at it. Look at those core principles. Find a way to gain experience. Find a small organization that you can reach out to, or even look at your internal, where you are at the moment. Ask them, do they have a compliance department? Can you shadow somebody, or you are looking to pivot into that area, and things like that, and explore doing some work within that organization, within where you are. And guess what? Once you have done that and picked up that experience, it goes on your CV, and nobody's going to take that from you. So it goes on your CV and it goes on your LinkedIn that you have done this. You have worked on this, you have helped an organization, to carry out a gap analysis. You have helped them to carry out a data discovery exercise. I think I might provide another link. So click on that and you have a look at that as well. And there's a lot that you can do to start picking up experience on your own that can go, yeah, I'm coming now, that will go on your CV. That's one thing I wanted to show. I wanted to also show you, I think, what Faith worked on. This is Faith's name on it here. So when they worked on the project, this was the recommendation that they provided to us, and we are working through it now. And that's what you as a privacy analyst, so simple. This is just a few slides. Based on the assessment that you have done, you now say to us that, okay, you need to look at cybersecurity. It was part of it. Look at how we dispose information, password protection. So these are also security. It talks about technical and organizational measures, remember? So business continuity, risk assessment, policies and procedures. So they finished that project, then they provided this recommendation, and we are now working towards this. And a lot of organizations have not even finished. And so that's why, as a privacy analyst, you will be in very, very high demand. There's a lot I could show you, but because of time, so this was one of our behind our projects, one that Faith actually worked on, and Jumoke and a few others. And essentially, it was just a couple of months, and this was what she put on her CV, and she started applying for jobs, like you've already heard from her. And so there's so much you can do. Now, I want to tell you about how we can help you, if you're interested. So I think I'm going to stop sharing and go back to my slides. So is there anyone, from everything that we said today, I think my question now to you is, who is interested in becoming a privacy analyst? Put in the chat, yes, me. Are you, anyone here interested in becoming a privacy analyst? I'm interested. Yeah, you, I knew already. Yeah. Yes. Okay, let me tell you. I'll find my slide again. A second. How we can. So I'm introducing today what I call a 4 months fast track program, and it's called GDPR in practice. Now we've called it GDPR. So thank you, Ebere, Angela, and Adewale. GDPR in practice because it's going to be hands-on. Faith mentioned that our courses, we don't just give you theory and you go away. We show you how to do it. And now we have a lot of GDPR projects planned. Okay, and we have, in fact, some people who joined us last month. We'll be working on these projects in the new year. So if you join now, it's for 4 months. Now it is for people who are ready to roll their sleeves up. It is for people who are ready to hit the ground running. Faith will tell you how intensive it was, but they were hungry and they just wanted to gain the experience. They just wanted, to finish quickly so that they can get out there to the job market. So if you're somebody, Valentina, Ebere, Angela, if you are someone that's interested, it is 4 months. And with our program, you will gain hands-on experience. We start, first of all, we give you, of course, the fundamentals. It will be theory classes. We walk you through all the corporate, and now I rush through, so you can imagine we've got lots of, things that we go through. We have templates and we show you how to do it. And then you gain access to working on our real live projects, okay? And we also have a learning management system where you can listen to videos, you can listen to the projects. We've got, I think, 2 GDPR projects completed now. There was GDPR 1, which Faith worked on. There was GDPR 2. So if privacy is the area you're looking at, you have access to looking at those projects to see all their deliverables. You have access to, we have Basecamp where we have past projects. You can look at them. You have access to our learning management system. You can listen to all the teachings and recordings that we've done with past projects, and you also go through that. So even if, for instance, you are busy on a day, you can't attend, you have access to the learning management system and you can listen to it at night or wherever you are. Then you are added to our community in Telegram of, my team and myself who are experts and people who are in the field of different areas to support you. And then you also have access to our recording on that winning CV that Faith talked to you about. You don't need security clearance for privacy analysts. So that's why I'm telling you that it is so not technical. You don't need, I don't have privacy clearance, I have security clearance. No, Faith doesn't have a security clearance. I should work for a top uni. So you don't need security clearance for privacy analyst jobs at all. You don't need it at all. I've not seen anyone that says required, not unless maybe if you go for the government ones, and I think most of their jobs, they will say you maybe, I don't know, depending, or if you go for maybe one of these consultancies that work for, that do government projects, they may require security clearance, but as a general, rule of thumb, it's no, you don't need it. Okay, so you're interested in business analysis, that's fine. You can go on our website and sign up. For today, it's just a privacy. So that's fine. Florence, you can go on to Trevor. Is Trevor here? If you can pop the link to go onto our website, or I can pop it in. So you go onto our website and you can sign up for the business analysis. Okay, so as I was saying, so you have all of that and you work on projects, and our projects are real life. They're not scenario based, they're not fictitious. You work on real life. We are looking at retention policy and then introducing that. We're looking at some security measures that we're going to also introduce within the business. And these are projects that will be, introduced in the new year. And so anybody who joins will work on those projects. And you have my experience. I've been leading a team of, like I said, over 30 brands. And a lot of my experience I bring on when I'm teaching, like Faith will can attest to, and I have a lot of templates which I will share. So you've got hands-on experience, which you will learn so that when you go for the interviews, you know what you're talking about. And it is a 4 months fast track program, and you have all of that. So I don't know if anybody has access. How do one contact you outside of the taster session? I'm on Instagram, or just you can contact me. Let me put our website. Sorry, bear me, guys. Sorry. I don't know where Trevor is. If you can pop the website address on there, let me do that now. So where are we? Put the website here. Okay, so let me talk about the, yeah, that's an example. So these sessions are evenings. We normally say to anybody who joins not to quit their jobs because you've got bills to pay. So don't quit your job until you get that new role. And so all our sessions are weekends, Saturdays, we don't work Sundays. So Saturday mornings and evenings, of weekday evenings. At the moment, we first of all start with 3 intensive sessions, which are Saturday mornings. I take that class personally for now. So we do that on Saturday mornings. We confirm the time based on availability and numbers and all of that. So we have 3 weekends where it's 2 hours. Most times we go maybe 2.5 hours because there's a lot to cover. So you do those 3 sessions. And then when you finish that, you then get placed on a project and you now work with your team. Now the project engagements are also in the evenings, but we normally start from 7 p.m. because a lot of people would have done their jobs, come back, rested. And then some people do shifts. We have some people who have night shifts. They will then talk amongst themselves and then they look at what works for them. Okay. So yeah, Scrum is next year. We're not doing Scrum. We are looking at Scrum probably mid next year. Okay. Yeah, so those of you who are asking, yeah, so we will do Scrum next year. And so it is quite flexible, evenings and weekends. So when you are doing your 9 to 5, you can have time. Some of the website you mentioned where you can get free GDPR training. OneTrust. I don't know if they still do that for free, but OneTrust, you can check OneTrust. Okay, so we do evenings, weekdays, and so weekdays, now it also depends, Adewale, it also depends on the group. So what we do is, and my availability, because I'm going to be taking this group, this GDPR project and program, it depends on, now we have different projects running. And so each project group will decide on what works. So we don't fix that until you have joined, and we have what we call, you've done your onboarding, and then we do a project kickoff meeting. So during the project kickoff meeting, we now say, Adewale, what is your personal situation? What's your availability? If you say your preference is Monday, we ask maybe somebody else, what's your preference? And we go with popular majority to select the days of meetings. But we tend to keep our days of meetings to a minimum of 2 times a week, even though some project teams meet for longer, depending on maybe if they have some quick deliverables and they are meeting with developers, you find them meeting more than twice, but we try to keep it to 2 times a week. You will have a project engagement where you are collaborating with your team and you're working on your projects, just like you work remotely. And then you work on your task, and then you meet up, you have access to Basecamp, you have access to our learning management system, you have access to our Telegram group, you can ask questions, you can collaborate, you organize meetings with your team. So in terms of the day, it depends on your group that you are put into, and we allow the group to decide so that it works best. And we like flexibility, so we are not like rigid. We are only rigid on the theory classes being Saturday mornings for now. But in terms of when the project teams meet, we allow the project teams to decide so that it works for most people. And that's kind of how it is. I hope that answers the question. This week, this program for now, we are making it open for 997. Now, and that is for 72 hours period. So if you sign up between now and the next 72 hours, you get this offer, or if not, it goes back to what our original offer is. So if you pay in full, you pay 997. And if you want to spread it, you can spread it across 3 installments of 397. So if you pay in full, it's 997. If you want to spread it, it is 397. And that's an offer. I'm sure Faith will be like, wow, I didn't get that. But it's an offer we're doing as our end of year offer, and it's only available for the next 72 hours. And if it is something you want to, Joe, you want to take up, we're going to put a link. Yes, we're in the UK, so it's £997. Yeah, I don't know if Trevor is on here. Excuse me, I'm just going to post the link here so you can sign up. Or if you think you are interested and you have an important question you want to ask me, I can pop it. Only if you're, it's not to pick my brain, it's not to gist for, no. But if you are, I'm going to pop some links now. Just give me a second. If you're interested in joining and you have one question, you can book a quick slot with me. Just bear with me a second. I'm not sure what's happening to Trevor today. He's not able to join. So I'm going to pop it down, pop it here. And that's it for today. We're done. It's a lot to cover, but yeah, so I would say keep researching, keep go on to OneTrust. So that's one. I've just dropped one link there. For those of you who have expressed interest. So you can either do the payment plan or you can pay in full, but it's only available for the next 72 hours and then it goes back to our original. Let me also, if you've got a question or you want to chat with me for 10 minutes, not to pick my brain about anything, but to ask any question about this course, you can. So the person asking about the business analysis, I just popped the link here. So we had an offer we were doing, but that's now ended. So our business analysis course, where is it? Let me pop that. Is 1,350 for the 6 months program, and you can spread it across 6 months as well. So yeah, I have popped some links here, and that's it done. So thank you for listening, and I hope that you found this useful. Let me pop the OneTrust link for you so you can go on and do more research. They do free trainings every now and then. I cannot guarantee that it's still on. But I know they were doing that last year. It's very intensive. Sometimes it might be a bit technical, depending on what course they're running. But there you go. So I'm going to pop that in the chat as well. That's the OneTrust link there. The promo is over, yes. Chinon, so my Calendly link is there. You can click on it, and if you want to have a chat there. And then finally, the person who wanted a contact, let me put that there. I've just dropped the OneTrust for your free training. You can go on there, and there's a OneTrust. They are the top. They are the biggest players when it comes to data protection and privacy. They have a lot of softwares, and there's a lot of content that you can get from OneTrust. So yeah, that's one that you can, I would say go on there, and also go on to iApp. Let me send you that link now as well. Yeah, so you can go on to that, and you can get some free resources as well. Just popping that there. So if you look at, by the time you explore OneTrust and iApp, you will get a lot of material there. That's iApp. Yep. So those two, OneTrust and iApp, go on and read about them. And also you can go on to LinkedIn and network with people within the privacy space. That's also very important when you're looking to make a career change. You need to be in the right network. Go on to Facebook. There are loads of GDPR, communities that are free to join, and you could get opportunities there. So I would say explore all these options if this is something you really want to do. And that's me done for today. So I hope that I see some of you join our program. Yeah, thanks for joining. So we will send a recording probably, if we can't do that today, maybe Monday. And yeah, you know how to reach to me. So you can email hello@Sterling Careers. and you can follow me on IG. And thank you very much. Have a good evening. Happy New Year to all of you, and I wish you a very good 2023. Thank you for joining, and bye-bye.